Welcome back. Let's begin with the single most important and most debated finding in this whole area, the carbon premium. In an influential 2021 study, Bolton and Kacperczyk found something that surprises many people. Firms with higher carbon dioxide emissions earn higher stock returns, not lower. A positive carbon premium. And in follow-up work in 2023, they showed this is a global phenomenon and that it's stronger in countries where climate policy is stricter. So what's going on? Why would dirty firms reward their shareholders more? Two interpretations. The first is rational. Investors demand extra compensation for bearing transition risk. If you hold a high carbon company, you're exposed to the danger that climate policy will one day hammer it. So you require a higher expected return to hold it, just as you'd demand more to hold any risky asset. The second is about preferences. Many investors shun sin stocks, brown, high-carbon firms, which depresses their prices and mechanically raises their future returns, exactly the shunned stock effect we met in Part 8. Either way, the uncomfortable conclusion is the same, and it's one we keep bumping into. Brown stocks can pay in the short run. They can reward investors, even as the capital funds precisely the high-carbon activities we're trying to wind down. The market in the short term may be paying people to hold the problem. The carbon premium is about average returns, but climate risk is really about disasters, sudden, catastrophic repricing, and that lives in the tails of the distribution. A clever 2021 study by Ilhan, Sautner, and Vilkov looked at the options market to measure this. Options are essentially insurance against price crashes, so their prices tell you how worried the market is about downside risk. And the researchers found that options on carbon-intensive firms are more expensive. It costs more to insure against a crash in a high-emission company than in a clean one. In other words, the market charges a premium to protect against the possibility that dirty firms suddenly collapse in value. Even more tellingly, this cost of tail protection rises when public attention to climate change spikes and falls after pro-climate political signals settle things down. So the market is actively pricing climate policy uncertainty, and it's doing so especially in the tails, exactly where the catastrophic transition scenarios live. This matters because it tells us investors aren't entirely blind to carbon risk. They're paying real money to hedge the worst case, and that hedging cost moves with the climate news cycle. If carbon risk shows up in stocks and options, does it also appear in debt? Yes. And this is important because bond markets are huge and dominated by careful, risk-focused institutional investors. Seltzer, Starks, and Zhu found that firms with poor environmental profiles face higher bond yields and worse credit ratings. And crucially, this effect is sharper under stricter environmental regulation, exactly where transition risk is most real. Lenders, in other words, charge dirty firms more to borrow. And Duan, Li, and Wen showed that a carbon premium also appears in the cross-section of corporate bond returns, mirroring the equity result. Put these together and the message is clear. Carbon risk shows up right across a company's capital structure, in its equity and in its debt. Both its shareholders and its bondholders are, to some degree, pricing in the danger of a carbon-constrained future. That consistency across different markets is what makes the evidence credible. It's not a quirk of one dataset, but a pattern that recurs wherever you look. Now to the concept that gives all of this its dramatic edge: stranded assets and the so-called carbon bubble. Here's the logic. Fossil fuel companies are valued partly on the reserves they own, the oil, gas, and coal still in the ground, booked as future revenue. But if climate policy tightens enough to keep warming near 1.5 degrees, a large share of those reserves can never be burned. And a reserve that can never be sold is worthless. It becomes a stranded asset, losing its value overnight when the market wakes up to it. Research by Atanasova and Schwartz and analysis reported in The Guardian suggests that up to half of carbon-heavy assets could lose their value by around the mid-2030s under a serious transition. The worry, dubbed the carbon bubble, dubbed the carbon bubble, is that fossil fuel firms are currently valued as if all their reserves will be burned, which, in a net zero world, is impossible. If markets are systematically overvaluing these assets, then there's a bubble waiting to deflate, potentially abruptly. Whether that repricing comes as a gentle deflation or a sudden crash is one of the central financial stability questions of the energy transition. And it's exactly why the next chapter on financial stability matters so much. Here's a subtler channel that connects carbon to the plumbing of markets: liquidity. Researchers have found that firms with higher emissions tend to have lower stock liquidity, wider bid-ask spreads, and more information asymmetry between insiders and outsiders. Why? Because if you don't know a company's true climate exposure, trading its shares is riskier, so the market makes them harder and costlier. To trade. But here's the hopeful flip side, and it's a lovely result. When a firm discloses its emissions for the first time, that information asymmetry shrinks, and measurably, its bid-ask spreads narrow. Better disclosure literally makes the stock easier and cheaper to trade. This is a classic idea from accounting and finance, the disclosure-liquidity channel, first formalized by Diamond and Verrecchia back in 1991, now applied to carbon. And it carries a powerful policy message. Mandatory carbon disclosure isn't just about virtue or transparency for its own sake. It has a concrete financial benefit, making markets work better by reducing the fog of uncertainty around who is really exposed. Information, quite literally, greases the wheels. So let's answer the big question we opened with: is carbon risk priced or mispriced? The honest, nuanced answer from all this evidence is at least partly priced. We've seen the carbon premium in stocks and bonds, the tail risk premium in options, the liquidity effects. Markets are clearly not ignoring carbon entirely. But, and this is the crucial caveat, investors may still be underreacting. There's evidence that people engage in what economists call local thinking. They focus on a company's near-term cash flows and underweight the distant, uncertain climate tail risks that are hard to imagine. If that's right, then today's carbon premium isn't a stable, fully priced equilibrium. It's the visible symptom of a slow, ongoing repricing that still has a long way to run. In plain terms, the market has started to wake up to carbon risk, but it may not be fully awake yet. And that's a genuinely important possibility for investors because it means the transition could still deliver sharp, unexpected repricings as markets catch up to a reality that science has understood for years. Let's recap this evidence-heavy video. Carbon risk is at least partly priced. There's a carbon premium in both stocks and bonds, a tail risk premium in options that moves with climate attention, and a disclosure liquidity benefit to reporting emissions. Stranded asset risk raises the specter of a carbon bubble, up to half of carbon heavy value at risk under a serious transition. But markets may still be underreacting, which means the repricing could have far to go. In the next video, we turn from measuring risk to doing something about it, decarbonizing portfolios, and the powerful logic of blended finance for mobilizing capital. See you then.